Hello, hello. Welcome back to Detection at Scale. Today, I'm here with Ken Bowles, who's the Director of Security Operations at GreenSky. Mr. Ken, how are we doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation. So tell us how you got here. Like, what were the big moments in your SecOps journey that really shaped like how you think about the SOC today?
Yeah, there's definitely been, throughout the 15 years I've been in it, like pivotal points all through there. I remember back when I first started, the key concept of just getting an alert was amazing, right? Of, hey, I could set up these tripwires, and if someone hits them, I know that something is wrong, all the way to today where we have AI helping out and automation helping out. What can we do better? What can we do faster? What can we do more efficiently, effectively with different people, different quadrants of cybersecurity, right? So, I mean, think about AppSec, you think about not just, SecOps, but AppSec, and then you got cloud security, you've got all these different pieces. How do you bring them all back together to fuel your initial fight?
And where were you before GreenSky?
So I was at a company called Tempest before this. They're at the healthcare market space. They were started up by a guy named Eric Lukowski. He started up Groupon and stuff like that, but he noticed a piece of like healthcare where data was not being shared, outside of different practices within healthcare, right? It was all just kind of compartmentalized. So he developed a brand that helped share data and genomic sequencing throughout the entire healthcare organization. So it really broadened a lot of doctors' horizons with that. And then I was tasked with, okay, we got all this data. How do you secure it? How do we do everything? HIPAA regulations? How do we do everything secure? So it was a big task, but it was fun.
What were like some of your takeaways from a project like that, like from a security perspective?
I'd say the biggest takeaway for me is learning how to do very unique things securely, right? And knowing that your end users want to do their job more effectively, and how can you help them? So like, certain use cases would be like, we have this healthcare instrument that's running on Android version that was end of life 6 years ago, but we need it. How do we get it online? And it was like, okay, well, we got to segment that piece of the network off, make it really restricted permissions, put it behind firewalls. Every proxy is the whole nine to very limit the traffic coming through. So you learn not just about that, you're just a small cog in a wheel in SecOps, but how your cog helps other cogs turn.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's high emphasis on privacy, and it's really important to protect PHI, and it's a thing that ends up in the news a lot. So
Mhm.
I can imagine the pressure of figuring that out.
Yeah, you're always getting tasked with that by board members and executives of like saying, basically, we don't want to end up on CNN. We don't want to end up on Fox News next. What can we do to prevent that? And then you come up with a grand model, right? But then it's like, well, what's more cost effective? So you really got to find those niche environments. And that's where like, detection at scale is always coming involved of like, oh, well, we're, an AWS shop, GCP, Azure, whatever. We have these mass enterprises in the cloud. How do we protect them all? How are we making sure that all our doors are locked, all our windows are locked, that we have sustainable walls that can, take brute force attacks, stuff like that. And it's always a challenge.
That's why this podcast exists.
Yeah.
You use the title right in the in the explanation. That's great. It's a good segue too. And the thing I wanted to ask you, which is like, what's your framework for building and scaling the SOC? Like, where do you feel like it's most important to focus first?
So whenever I like come into a situation, I always think of, what are the crown jewels of, the company, the organization, or just the environment I'm in? What's the most important? And then you scale out from there. So you got to understand, like, GreenSky has to do with credit cards. So our credit card data and our PCI data is the most critical in the cloud. Who can access those? I mean, I've yet to run into a company that doesn't look at AWS and always think there's over permissions everywhere, right? So how do you get rid of the over permissions? How do you make sure that your alerts are valuable, right? And you're not just alerting the same crap over and over and over again. It's being able to go through there with a fine-tooth comb, which is by no means fast, but it is very effective in the long run. So that's usually my first thing to go to is the crown jewels.
And then how do you prioritize in the realm of security operations? It makes sense. But I think when you're going about this, do you go broadly into other parts of security? You know, you even mentioned like over permissions. I mean, talk us through a little of your thought process of securing the crown jewels. Like, where do you start?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great segue because, like I was saying earlier about working with other departments, it's not just, the HR department or the legal department or anything, but it's internally as well. Like when you're talking about over permissiveness, is your team, the SecOps team, usually in charge of the cloud? I'd say it depends on the company. Sometimes it is. Sometimes, that they already have cloud administrators out there or security cloud administrators. So you really have to think through, okay, when I find these nuggets, where do they fit back in the priority list of getting them resolved? Are they small pieces of the puzzle, large pieces of the puzzle? I've been around enough years to know that, over permissiveness and not managing your permissions in the cloud snowballs over years. Usually there's 10 people and 15 years that have been managing it, and who knows where it's gone today. So
Gotta love tech debt.
Yep.
So obviously in the last 5 years, things have changed quite a lot from the advent of big data and now the advent of large language models. So I guess, how is AI changing like your day-to-day work so far, and what's actually working? Not so much like where things are going, but like, what are you seeing tangibly in production right now?
I mean, I always enjoy a good AI. I feel like everyone overuses the term AI for everything now. Some of it's just automation, which is fine, but it's not AI. But either way, the large language models and being able to search faster, more effectively, is leading to a more productive SOC. When an incident happens, you don't want to be the last one to the finish line there where you're just playing catch up. You want that alert to trigger. You want to be following on the person's heels and then eventually overtake them, cut them off so that they don't do more damage. Being able to be effective in your searches and have AI show you what's there is brought like a whole new light to the game from my analysts.
So really, it's just getting more value out of the security data that we already have and reducing the barrier to insight, right?
Yeah, and I would also say, like, another term to throw out there is like a single pane of glass, if you will. Like AI kind of helps do that because, like, a lot of companies have the problem of this alert triggered in this system, and then you're using this system for your SIEM, this system for your EDR, this system for this, and you're trying to get all of those together, and it's really difficult. But I've seen in the last 5 years, there's more and more cooperativeness between these systems to give you that single pane of glass so that you can take action faster. And that's what it's all about is, how effective I can be is how effective my tools are and how effective my people are, how well trained they are, how we can use the tools faster.
Yeah, and AI really plays an important role in being like a new middleware in a lot of ways, because every one of those systems across the stack tends to have their nuance, right? Their nuance in how you search them, their nuance in performance and best practices. And AI ends up being that sort of generalizable middleware where you don't have to learn those things anymore and you can just focus on the strategic security work. And like, are you seeing that sort of play? It sounds like you're seeing that play out, right?
Definitely seeing that play out. And, I'd say it is key, especially when you're hiring on like newer analysts that have not been around a SOAR or, I know SQL, don't know SQL, whatever, right? I don't know what this log is coming in, right? It could be anything coming in, and I don't know how to generalize it and understand that this is good or bad. You're right. AI is doing that kind of to help out and push people in the right direction. So you don't, like in my day, I had to learn what a Windows log was different from, a Linux log. And you just get them side by side and it would just be fragmented. Now it's a unified data model. The data's coming in clean, nice. It's got fields, categories. So it's helped out a lot. Like I'm looking at a log and I'm like, oh, this is so easy now.
These analysts don't know how good they have it.
I know the good old days, as we talked about, even though it was only 10 years ago.
Like, I remember grepping logs on a Linux box.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's certainly much different now. And now the game is, how effective can we be training the agents and providing enough context and documentation, which also sort of creates like a good virtuous cycle in a lot of ways. So my question is, like, what have you seen work when it comes to like documenting institutional knowledge to help bring more of that into context? Like, have you Have you had the chance to play around with that and experiment there?
So like documenting institutional knowledge. So that's always like a love-hate relationship. It's great to have it, but at the same time, is it still effective? It's still there. Things seem to change every 6 months in the IT world. So it's always, and I mean, even in businesses themselves, things can change quickly. I always like to tell my team that, like, I'll say, like, when I make a playbook or something, be like, this playbook is a guideline. If something doesn't smell right, if something doesn't look right, you shouldn't just stick to the knowledge you have here. Guys, like, use your intuition as well. So it kind of then gives them a guideline to say, okay, these are the steps I should follow. This is the outcomes I should. It's either I know this is false positive because of these factors and I close it out, or if there's something that's off, then we escalate and go from there. So the institutional knowledge of, like, overall in a cybersecurity perspective is very key to laying the foundation of things. But I always, as people learn, I've learned to lean on their intuition and what smells good, what smells bad. The analysts are the ones with their ear to the ground all the time. So I remember back when I was an analyst, looking at logs, I'd be like, this one just looks different to me. Like, there's something about it. And I'd bring it up and, we'd find something, tangible coming off of it.
And I think the challenge now is how do we codify that thought process? Because the human factor has always been the piece that we can't scale. We can't really scale that judgment super easily, that, like what you're saying. But like, how do you think about the thought process of starting to do that? Because there's a formula that goes into this looks a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
How would you explain that?
I'd say it's situational dependent, but the idea of that it's something I've seen a million times before, and this one just looks a little off, or it doesn't look like it fits in this place, is going to be key to me. Trying to think of an exact situation where that's happened, and one's not coming top of mind. But using that towards, like, AI. AI is always learning, but at the same time, it's got to start somewhere, and it usually starts from someone's brain. What can I think of to teach this AI differently, and then it starts growing from there. That's when you get into, like, more or less the generative AI model, where it's actually learning on its own and not more reactive AI, which is, decision based.
Yeah, I think the thought process is it's very highly contextual. And the challenge that I've seen is so many things are very dynamic in an organization. To your point, I agree with. Every 3 to 6 months or somewhere in that ballpark, things are changing. But then there's also, like, the very ephemeral things. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Like, half the internet was down this morning, right? And unless the model knew that, it would misinterpret events, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the goal, I think, for AI and SecOps going forward is, how can we give the model enough context to where it has as much information as an analyst, and it has access to the same tools as an analyst? And then it can start to, then we can start to push it and see how far can we go in accuracy of judgment. And then we can actually change our process. So
that's a great way to put it. It's like you've been thinking about this a while.
Yeah, I have been. I mean, I've been learning a lot from folks like you and just interviewing people and seeing, what's working and what's not working. And I think breaking it down in first principles is just important for us as practitioners, because then we can better figure out, like, what are the limits of the agents? Because there are limits. I think we have to be careful not to over optimize. But if we understand what LLMs are, which are basically big pattern matchers, we have to take advantage of that. But we can't ask it to predict the future, which is a little bit of what we kind of have to do in security, in security operations, right? Because it's all about interpreting events, but you can never predict what will happen. So you can build confidence and context, but you can never be certain that if you write a detection for your crown jewels, the detection is just looking for the behavior. It's not able to identify the intention. And that's our job as analysts, right? So yeah, it's just like it's a fun, like, thought process. It's how do we begin to codify what it means to judge an alert? And then how do we make that repeatable over time to some degree? And a lot of it comes down to exactly the thing that you were saying, 5-10 minutes ago, which is, if we can use AI as the bridge to all these different tools, it will build the right level of context to have the same level of judgment almost. It depends on, like, the reasoning and things, but I digress.
No, I love that concept because, or I shouldn't say the concept, that thought process there, because it introduces so many other things. Like I can think, back in the day, I had an alert. This was back when impossible travel was just becoming a thing for companies to even alert on, and it was hey, do we have a suspicious login? The tool said, I still remember to this day because I question the word suspicious all the time. We have a suspicious login from this user. So I click into the platform. I'm like, okay, what's going on? They're like, well, the user logged in, we're in Georgia, and then I can't remember the exact, but then logged in like 6 hours later in New York. And I'm thinking in my head, who cares? Like 6 hours, they could have flown there. Like, what made it suspicious? And I remember like just constantly asking that question. It's like, okay, guys, what made it suspicious? Well, they're logging in two different places at, in the same day. I'm like, okay, I could fly a plane, no big deal. Like, what made it suspicious? So we really had to like boil down to that. And nowadays, AI is taking that over and really helping determine the suspicious level, like the confidence level of what you have. Like AI is also able to like scrape data before to say, wait, I actually see this person doing this once a month. Maybe they're always traveling at, in 3-week intervals every month. So it's actually not suspicious anymore. And it's able to bring in that light, which, would probably take an analyst, 30 minutes to look into, we'll say, to say like, oh yeah, they do this once a month. And then you have, like you were just saying, the intent, right? You'd have to reach out to the user to kind of get their intent. Was this on purpose? We say it failed, like say it was the same situation, but it failed MFA. Did you mean to click no? Did you just fat finger it? What was the intent there to understand that? So there's a lot of things AI is bringing to the table that helps shorten up that analytical time frame. At the same time, though, I would say we have to be, I don't want to use the word cautious, but we just have to be cognizant that AI is not perfect. Like you said, I wish AI could predict the future. I'd be winning the lotto every week, right? But like at the same time, sometimes it does make a best guess. And you've got to know when to question AI. Because I recently, I was, forget what AI platform it was, but I asked a question. I was like, it just didn't seem right. So I said, list your sources. And it said, we just collected data. I was like, so you don't know if you're right? And it was like, no, we just think this is right. I was like, okay, I'll go Google search my own stuff. So, I mean, it's doing its best all the time, which is great. But to your point, we've got to know the limitations of what it can and can't do right now, right? It's always learning, which is perfect, but you can't take everything AI does and says as gospel.
Of course. But what you said is important around the transparency of listing data sources. That is so important in SecOps, because every like window of time is very important. And one of the things that, we're working on our agents is we do like the pivoting, and, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to actually implement that. There's always a lag between an alert and the events. And naturally, the agent will say, oh, well, the alert was created here, so I'm going to look in from the alert creation to an hour later, and I'm going to see like what happened. But in a lot of ways, there's latency both in detection, and then there's things that happen that precede the detection. So getting even that right can be a little tricky sometimes for LLMs. So you have to teach it about the basics of pivoting and the nuance of your system and all these little edge cases that can exist. And that really goes into that final analysis that you're talking about. Because if it doesn't do that right, then it won't see all the behaviors that led to the alert. And then it's hard to judge and have that instinct of like, is this actually risky or not? So there's so many, I think that the punchline is like, there's so many variables to this. And it's all these micro calculations that we're doing every day as analysts. But now that we're having to think about first principles, it is really hard. But we're seeing a lot of really positive progress. And that's what I'm personally most excited about. And it sounds like you're seeing some really great practical examples of that as well. Like, are you at a point yet where agents are looking at all of your alerts or some, meaningful percentage of them?
Yeah, we are. We're definitely using, and I mean, I'll say like for the last couple of years and couple of companies I've worked for, like we've started using those AI models to help drive a solution that's more accurate, that's more effective. Years ago, it was just an idea. Now it's, everyone's got a piece of AI. So it's good to see the tremendous input and impact that AI has in cybersecurity in general.
Are you seeing impact on the detection side? And if so, like what's been working there regarding AI?
So on the detection side, I feel like the impact I've seen is just a higher level of confidence. And it's not just the boilerplate, hey, we made an alert, someone tripped over the alert, I got it, and now what's the next step, right? Following a playbook. It's using that AI to enrich data, to pull multiple fields, kind of like what I was saying earlier about like single pane of glass type of deal. Like if you can use your AI to say, hey, when this alert goes off, I also want you to reach out to your IAM tool and pull a list of permissions they may have, or a person or a system may have. And then also reach out, check their emails too, in case this was a phishing link that was clicked, pulling all these sources into one and being able to just, spit it out on one page. I could scroll through it. Okay, here's the fish report. They didn't click on nothing, recently. Nothing's downloaded through there. And then going on, okay, their permissions are these, looking over at what the alert actually was, producing that, single pane of glass. I hate that term, but it is a true term. Being able to create that it has been key for the analysts and their effectiveness.
It's an accurate term. I think it's had a revival with AI in a lot of ways, because you need to give agents the similar type of visibility that your team has, right? And then the effect of that is a huge force multiplier in a way. So I don't think I think it's an appropriate term.
It's a love-hate. I feel like sometimes it just gets overplayed by salespeople, and then it's like, oh man, I hear that term 16 times a day.
Hey man, I work in SIEM, so I get it. It's like, that was always like the joke. Like, oh God, I don't want another vendor saying single pane of glass. It's just so played out. But yeah, I think it has a very different meaning now, because you're not building it in the same light, because you're giving it to an agent. It's not the same as I'm building this single pane of glass so my analyst can look at a bunch of dashboards. It's not like that anymore.
Very true.
Where do you land on the detection strategy just broadly? Like, what do you think is important to emphasize in terms of coverage? Like, are you a fan of MITRE framework 100%? Like, where do you sort of land on the spectrum of your detection mindset?
The MITRE framework and all the alphabet soup of government, frameworks that they throw out there. I'm a fan of them when it comes to like a guideline, right? They're not a one size fits all model, right? It's not going to fit every business perfectly. So you've really got to pick and choose what fits you and how you need to detect and respond off of that. But it's a great framework for, when I was just starting off as a manager, they were throwing those, well, we want something that's MITRE framework. And I'm like, this thing's X amount of pages long. It's going to take me years to read, right? But after you actually understand what they're requesting of you, of like, these are just guidelines. How can these guidelines protect us? Because these are, quote unquote, the best practices to run off of.
I think the intention is always good of MITRE, and it does give a great system for thinking about the sequences of an attack. But the overemphasis of we need to have an alert on everything, that just doesn't make any sense.
I've been in those audit calls where they pull up the MITRE framework and they're like, okay, what about this alert? Do you have this alert? Do you have this alert? I'm like, that alert doesn't even apply to us. I was like, and here's why. Like, they're like, oh, do you have an alert for watching when things go public in our local, environment? And I'm like, that can't happen. And here's why it can't happen. I'll create the alert after too. I was like, but if it does happen, we can use it as a safety net. I'm just spitballing a fake alert, but it's interesting to see how many people lean on it very hard, how many people dislike it completely, how many people are kind of like me, where it's a good best practice, it's a good guideline to always lean back on, but you just got to understand where your network and your technology limitations are.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just looking at the matrix right now, and some of these are just so generic in terms of what an attacker could do. So for example, like Paku can create malicious Lambda functions. It's like, okay, well, how are you going to detect that? You're going to look for new Lambda functions and like maybe a few other little things, maybe like the Paku user agent or something. But the point is like, you can't monitor all these things all the time. You'll just burn everyone out. But what you can do is you can keep track of those changes. So this concept of like signaling, I think, is really popular now in security, where, if it's not popular, it's just this idea of labeling data and saying like, well, this is serverless execution. It's a thing that happened. We don't need to get an alert about it. And we might have the coverage, which is good. And it might correlate into like something bigger. But I think that's like a healthier mindset. You have all the things related to MITRE that apply to your threat model, and then the things you actually need to get alerted on.
That's a key point to like when I'm actually creating alerts. I think back, 10, 15 years ago, it was like, okay, well, we want to watch for, brute force attacks was like the big one years and years ago, right? Of like, well, anyone that's tried to or made an attempt to sign in 4 times in 2 minutes or whatever and failed, we want to know about it. Nowadays, no one wants to know about that because we just put a block in your account. They're like, okay, well, like to that point, right? Of like, we want to know, but we don't want to alert. And then we can put a new threshold on it of like, when your account gets locked twice, let me know that, because that means there's been 2 consecutive. So like we've had to broaden our horizon of like what's meaningful coming out and understand, what we need to see right now. Because, we're all going to get pulled in a million different directions all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, don't you think AI can help in a lot of ways for those rules that might still be a little noisy?
110%. Oh, yeah. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you get your AI to learn on your network about how users respond and how, people are traversing your network and pivoting just on the normal business, then it establishes that baseline to where you can find these outliers, right? I think back to, like almost a UBA type of work, right? You want to find that user behavior analytics to know what's an outlier then. Kind of like we said, the person flying to New York every 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's interesting because even outliers tend to be signal that's not always significant, right? Because it's like, yeah, if I go, like, I just went to Asia for the first time in like 6 years. So it's like, yeah, that's anomalous, but I did it.
Yeah.
Like, is a UABA system gonna flag that? It
probably would.
Yeah, it probably should say like, hey, Jack logged in, from Asia for the first time in 5 years. But that's not suspicious inherently, right? But I think I liked your contrast on controls being the solve, which is right. You get alerted enough, or you have some state to where you have to manually review those things, but you put a control behind it, and you're like, yeah, whatever, control's there. As long as the control's there, we're good.
It also, like I will say, just in that same vein, is like you need to audit your controls, because I can't tell you how many times a control has been set up, but then, the ACL list changes hands between 2 engineers and then it gets changed. And your controls no longer are in the right place in the right order. That's specifically for ACLs. But like it could be the same with user or like system configuration. Or it could be the same with AWS security measures, whatever. You need to go through and audit those, because I can't tell you how many times I've been like, well, why is this happening? Don't we have a block in for this? Or don't we have a stop to this? Or shouldn't this not do this? And then we look into it and we find, oh, there's a tiny little crack that it's sipping through. And then you got to figure that whole story out.
Or just ask your agent and be like, hey, did this control change in the last month?
Yep. Pull out your LLMs and ask it, when's the last time this changed? Or what are all the changes that have taken place in the last 6 months?
Yeah, that's a superpower for sure. Okay, so this has been really interesting, this conversation in general. I think we've hit on a lot of cool points about how things are evolving, and curious, like, where are you focused next? Like, what's the next big thing that you're interested in doing, or maybe like taking a stab at with regards to like the SecOps program and something you want to really improve?
I mean, generally, like I'm seeing all these alerts, I shouldn't say alerts, all these logs coming in right from these different sources. So I'm excited to see the new age SIEM, if you will, right? I'll still call it a SIEM because I don't know what the next acronym is going to be after SIEMs, but like I think back to Splunk was, if you didn't have Splunk, you weren't taking security seriously at your company, right? That's how everyone viewed it for years. But then, you've got all these newer companies coming out that are showing you that, they're taking Splunk like to the next level, right? And bringing in that AI bring in the automation that you can take in place, connecting all of your tools in one source, being able to just kind of have all the dots connected in one space is key. And especially when you get into the cloud, because as you mentioned earlier, I feel like now that the cloud has been out for what, decade or so now, like we're really pushing hard on that tech debt, that a lot of companies have all this old crap still in place, these old lambdas that are still kicking off, or these old probably Python scripts back then that we were writing. And it's like, how do you use a SIEM to watch those or to even know they exist? That person that wrote it left the company 6 years ago and they still need this for a critical business process and it's out of date, right? And we'll throw in there that it's got 10 vulnerabilities. What do you do? So being able to connect the dots with everything is going to be key. Like I said, the cloud is what scares the crap out of me the most. And I feel like there is a big area to where like SIEM can do more. Or again, I'm using the SIEM term, the next gen SIEMs and everything that are coming out, or I wouldn't even say SIEM, but whatever tools in that space are coming out, when they're focusing on those, that's what really excites me to see what's out there.
The agentic SIEM or the AI SIEM.
Yeah. Whatever they're calling it nowadays. I'm getting too old, so I can't be cool anymore and come up with my own verbiage.
The acronym has been attempted to deprecate for a while.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I think everyone's mental model is so clear on what it is. So I think it'll just stay SIEM, but the idea of a SIEM will standardize that it has AI. And I think that that's just how technology evolves in general, right? It's like the new expectation for cars is that they drive themselves. Like build a car, like it drives itself now. And, I say that as a Tesla owner, and that certainly, it's like ChatGPT. When ChatGPT came out, it's like, well, this is search now. This is how I ask questions about the world. And if you don't have that, you're behind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an amazing revolution to live through. So, I think we're fortunate to live through it. And I like that, a lot of people are embracing it in security, because I think have you noticed this as well, like broadly in the community, where people might be resistant to AI? I mean, probably, right?
There are some instances of like resistance to AI. They think they'll take jobs. That's the biggest one. I'd say not even just in security, right? Like every company wide, they think AI is going to take jobs. Don't get me wrong, it probably will in some aspects. But I would say the key thing about, like, we'll say keeping a job or whatever, is learn how to use AI to your benefit, right? That's what it's all about. So if you show like, hey, using AI just made sending out these 500 emails I send out every day down to 20 minutes, what else you got? It's like, instead of worrying about your job, you're going to get a promotion because you just figured out how to do something faster that they were not able to do. Now, again, I could be wrong, and you come back and blame Ken for all your problems, but that's something I've noticed with technology over and over throughout the years. If you embrace it, you're far better off than trying to ignore it.
I think you're right. And I would actually say you are right, for sure, right? Because think about the cloud. The cloud's a great example. Like, if you're resisting cloud, you're going to get left behind because you won't be able to have the same advantage as everybody else, because every new technology brings some new advantage. So you have to embrace, and I think the challenge is figuring out what are the limits of that advantage. And some people, even in cloud, were like, well, cloud actually financially doesn't make sense for us. So we're going to build our own data centers. And that's smart for them, but probably for 95% of companies, it doesn't make sense to do that.
Yeah. We're not IBM. We can't build our own clouds.
Exactly. Cool. So, we always end with 3 pieces of advice, but before I ask you that, I want to ask you, what on your bookshelf do you want to talk about? Do you have like a cool book you're really excited about, or something that, because, people have these bookshelves and they always like feature a particular book. So I'm curious, like, which book on there is interesting to you the most?
I should have had all my SANS books. They're actually on a different bookshelf, just all plastered up here too. No, I wasn't even thinking about it. So, I mean, my newest one is my Forensic Team Field Manual. So I really posted up.
Classic.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, even though this is like an old book, I've never owned it. But yeah, this is like back in the day, like non-analytical things, or I shouldn't say non-analytical, non-SIM like searching of like how you do it. Like, I'm just threw up to a page and just like what we were talking about earlier. They're talking about how to do a grep, like pull logs from specific file paths through a grep. That's been my new read through there. But I mean, I have a lot of Linux books here. I do like the how to measure anything in cybersecurity. It's like a whole series of how to measure something, and then it's like, blank. This one's about cybersecurity. And, I really like that one because it goes in depth of like, it says it many times throughout the book, you can't manage what you can't measure. And that really always has resonated with me throughout my cybersecurity career of like people saying, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And I'm like, okay, how are we going to measure it? And they're like, well, we're just going to do but no, I'm like, no, I can't manage it then. Yeah, don't tell me to do something that we can't like tangibly look at. So that's been helpful for me throughout my managerial career.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a good leadership principle in general, right?
Mhm.
Like you can't change something that you can't quantify, and it's a good mindset to have. Ken, would love to wrap the episode up on 3 pieces of advice. Maybe let's say for teams getting started on AI and cyber.
So 3 pieces of advice is 1, there is tons of free courses out there. A lot of these new companies that are like startup companies in cyber, they all have a really good niche, and they usually have videos, courses, techniques they're going to teach you. Take them all. Right. Even if it doesn't apply, you never know. 5 years down the road, it's going to hit you. Be like, wait, I've seen something like this before. I never underestimate analysts' value of like bringing something to the table. So that's the first piece. Second piece is lean on your team members, right? Especially if you're a newer analyst, lean on the ones that have been there, for 10, 15 years, longer than me, 20 years, and really focusing on, picking through the breadcrumbs of what they're teaching you to know, hey, this is awesome. I want to learn more about that. That's how I kind of, I mentioned SANS earlier, but, that's why I took a SANS course is because, my senior analysts at the time were like, hey, like SANS and check this one out. And I ran off and did it. And the third piece is I would say it's kind of in line with the other 2, but always be a sponge, right? Absorb as much as you can. I mean, it's always going to be like drinking from a fire hose. It doesn't get easier in cybersecurity. So just know that you're not the only one drinking from that fire hose.
Yeah, and I think you said it well. Use AI to your benefit, I think is kind of an extension of that, right?
Yeah.
Like really lean in and learn and be the sponge and absorb as much as you can about what's happening. And yeah, it's good advice, man. I like it. Ken, thanks so much for your time. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, are you hiring? Anything you guys are doing on your side that you want to plug and promote?
Oh man, I wish. No, but we're currently not hiring right now, but I will let you know so you can put it on blast.
Sounds good, sir. All right. Thank you again. Great to chat with you.
All right. Thanks.